The rain had a way of making war feel older than it was. In northern France, in the weeks after the breakout from Normandy, it soaked through uniforms, filled trenches, and turned tank tracks into deep scars across the earth. But to Staff Sergeant Aaron M. Blake, the rain was a blessing. It washed away the smell of burnt oil, hot metal, and something else he never wanted to name. It swept the battlefield clean, at least for a moment. Blake wasn't supposed to be on the front lines. Officially, he was a maintenance sergeant attached to the 743rd Tank Battalion. Unofficially, the men called him Dr. Steel. He could bring anything with tracks back to life. Stuarts, Shermans, half-tracks, even the occasional German Panzer when they needed it to tow something. If it had an engine, Blake could coax it back with a wrench, a few curses, and a cigarette dangling from his lips. His legend started the day he rebuilt an entire transmission using only a hammer, a crowbar, and the baseplate from a busted .50 cal ammo can. But the story that would echo through the battalion, through much of the 30th Infantry Division, in fact, began with a single dead Sherman sitting like a wounded beast in a muddy orchard outside the French town of Chou. The crew had abandoned it 2 nights earlier after a Tiger's round punched straight through the glacis plate, killing the driver instantly. The survivors bailed out and swore the tank was cursed. No one wanted to go near it after that. It sat silent and cold under the apple trees, rain dripping from the barrel, the hull half sunken in the mud, like it was waiting for someone to give it a reason to breathe again. Blake had seen it only once before he decided to take ownership of it. Not because it was salvageable, far from it. The engine was seized, the tracks were twisted, the transmission was locked, the bow gun was ruined. Worst of all, the hit had left a fist-sized hole at the front, letting rainwater seep inside every night. No sane mechanic would bother. But Blake wasn't thinking about sanity. He was thinking about what the captain had said that morning. They were down to 3 operational tanks. German anti-tank crews had found their range. And the battalion needed armor, any armor. He smoked half a cigarette, flicked it into the mud, and said, "To hell with it. I'll make the old girl walk again." Everyone stared at him. Blake just shrugged, grabbed his tools, and trudged toward the wreck. He named the tank Emma, though no one knew why. Some whispered it was an old lover, others said it was his sister's name. Blake never told, he just addressed the tank like an old friend. "Emma, if you give me just one spark," he muttered as he climbed inside the damp interior, "I'll get you roaring again." His boots splashed in rainwater that had pooled across the hull interior. The smell hit him like a slap: burnt metal, stale gunpowder, and the faint copper scent of the driver's blood that hadn't fully washed out. He gritted his teeth, pulled out a handkerchief, wiped the steel clean, and got to work. For hours Blake crawled through the tank like a surgeon opening a corpse. He removed ruined components, sorted salvageable parts, and made a mental list of everything he needed. It was long and depressing. The kind of list that made ordnance officers laugh. But Blake had 2 advantages no one else did. First, he had an obsession with bringing machinery back from the dead. Second, he had spent years taking apart clunkers in his father's garage back in Iowa. When he couldn't find parts, he made them. War forced men into many roles. Blake's role was resurrection. He cannibalized parts from destroyed tanks. He scavenged from burnt-out German wrecks. He improvised electrical components from broken radios. He hammered bent armor plates into shape. He used old track pins to rebuild the tension system. He even rewired the ignition system using copper wire stripped from a ruined field telephone. Men stopped by to watch him. They offered cigarettes, coffee, sometimes a joke, sometimes silence. But no one told him to give up. Deep down, the battalion needed a miracle, and Blake was the closest thing they had. After 3 days of labor, sweat, and more curse words than the men heard in a month, he crawled out of the hatch and announced, "Emma's going to breathe tonight." They didn't believe him. But that evening, as darkness settled over the orchard, Blake sat atop the turret with a cigarette in his mouth and a wrench in his hand. He nodded to the corporal holding the fire extinguisher, just in case, and shouted, "Hit it." The crewman turned the master switch. The engine coughed once, then again. Then the entire tank shook like a beast waking up angry. Flames spit from the exhaust pipe. The engine roared. Men cheered. Blake slapped the turret affectionately. Told you, he whispered. Emma lived. The next challenge was convincing Command to let him operate the tank. Officially, Blake wasn't a tanker anymore. He had started the war as one, but after losing his crew at St. Lo, he had refused to climb inside another tank for months. The battalion commander reassigned him to maintenance, figuring the kid needed something to keep him occupied. But Command wasn't blind. They saw Blake's eyes when Emma roared back to life. There was fire there, something dangerous and steady, the kind of thing that made a man deadly in the right circumstances. So when the major asked, "You really want to take her out on the line?" Blake nodded once. She ain't standard, she ain't pretty, but she'll move, and she'll shoot, and a crew, I'll find one. He did, or rather, they found him. Corporal James, Jimmy, Knox was a wiry 19-year-old from Boston who had been begging to get back into a tank ever since his Sherman had been destroyed by a Panther. He volunteered the moment he heard Blake needed a driver. Private Samuel Ortiz, a quiet kid from New Mexico with the patience of a saint, became the loader. His steady hands made him perfect for the job. For gunner, Blake chose Private First Class Henry Hawk Dalton, a man known for two things: near-perfect vision and the uncanny ability to hit anything with a rifle at 600 yards. Blake figured the same skill would transfer to the 75mm. As for the commander, Blake decided the only man he trusted to command the tank was himself. Emma was different from any Sherman on the battlefield. The hole in the front glacis was patched with welded scrap armor. It looked ugly but held strong. The suspension groaned like an old farm cart. The coaxial machine gun had been replaced with a German MG-34 because it was the only reliable gun left lying around. But the biggest difference was the gun sight. Blake had modified it using spare lenses scavenged from a destroyed German anti-tank scope. Dalton tested it on a dead tree 800 yards away. The shot went clean through. "Feels like a damn sniper rifle," he whispered. And Blake smiled. A 40-ton sniper. He didn't realize how literal that title would become. The battalion's orders were simple: hold the valley until reinforcements arrived. The valley was a long curve of farmland and broken stone walls leading to a key crossroads the Germans desperately wanted back. Intelligence said the enemy had at least 2 companies of infantry, several POC-40 anti-tank guns, and possibly a Panther prowling the area. The Americans had 3 working Shermans, 2 half-tracks, and Blake's Frankenstein creation. Blake positioned Emma behind a collapsed barn at the base of the valley, half hidden by a slope and an angled stone wall. Dalton had a perfect field of fire. Knox kept the engine warm. Ortiz loaded shells quietly, rhythmically, like a man preparing for a long night. Blake scanned the valley through binoculars. "Remember," he told his crew, "we don't fight like a tank. We fight like a rifle. We shoot, we move, we vanish. Let the other Shermans do the dancing. We'll do the killing." The first Germans appeared at dawn. A column of infantry moved cautiously across the open fields, rifles slung low. Behind them rolled an anti-tank gun, its barrel glinting in the early sunlight. Dalton whispered, "Range, 900. Blake didn't hesitate. "Fire." The shell shot out with a crack that shook the turret. It arced cleanly and slammed directly into the POC-40, exploding in a flash of metal and bodies. Before the infantry could react, Dalton fired again. One shot, one explosion, this time tearing through a cluster of soldiers diving for cover. The Germans scattered. Emma didn't. She became the valley's invisible hunter. By noon, Emma had destroyed 2 machine gun nests, a mortar team, and another anti-tank gun. Every shot was precise, almost surgical. Dalton joked he could hit buttons off a German officer's coat if Blake asked him to. Word spread quickly through the infantry lines. "Dr. Steele's tank is sniping them. 40 tons of death. Listen for the shot. You'll never hear the hit." Each kill bolstered the morale of American infantrymen who had endured too many days of retreat. They started calling Emma the Reaper. Blake didn't like the nickname. Tanks were machines, not ghosts. But even he had to admit, Emma moved like something more than steel. The Germans adapted. By sunset, they sent scout teams to flank Emma's position. They fired mortars. They tried artillery. They even attempted to sneak a Panzerfaust team close under cover of smoke. But Blake was always one step ahead. At dusk, with fog creeping over the valley floor, the Panther finally appeared, its silhouette massive, its gun trained like a judgmental eye across the fields. Dalton swallowed hard. Range, 1300, Blake said. That's far. I know. Too far. I know. But Blake also knew something else. Dalton was the best shot he'd ever seen. And Emma had already proven herself. Load AP, Blake ordered. Ortiz slammed the armor-piercing round into the breech. Dalton aligned the scope, closed one eye, held his breath. Steady, Blake whispered. The Panther rotated its turret toward the American position. Dalton fired. The recoil slammed the turret. The shot streaked across the valley. And the Panther exploded, ammunition cooking off in a fiery burst that lit the night sky. Dalton exhaled shakily. Blake patted his shoulder. Told you she'd shoot straight. That wasn't her, Dalton murmured. That was luck. Blake shook his head. Luck doesn't explode Panthers. The second day was worse. The Germans were enraged by the loss of the Panther. They launched a furious counterattack at dawn. Waves of infantry pushed forward under cover of mortars. Machine gun fire raked the stone walls. Snipers targeted any American foolish enough to show a helmet. Emma became the anchor of the defense. Every time German soldiers massed for an assault, Emma's gun roared. Dalton fired so fast his shoulder bruised. Ortiz loaded until his hands blistered. Knox kept the tank angled and mobile, preventing enemy gunners from finding a good shot. Blake stayed calm, always calm. 200 yards, right side, behind the hedgerow. 5 infantry crossing the ditch. Get the one with binoculars first. Mortar team setting up. Range 750, take them out. Kill after kill, shot after shot, precision that made even veteran tankers shake their heads in disbelief. By late afternoon, Emma's tally reached levels unheard of for a single Sherman. 20, 25, 26, most were infantry, some were machine gun crews, a few were scouts. One was a half-track foolish enough to try crossing open ground. The 28th kill came at dusk, a group of German officers attempting to set up a forward command post behind a stone farmhouse. Dalton's shell hit the wall, collapsed the building, and ended the attack for good. When the valley finally fell silent, Blake climbed out of the hatch, sat on the turret, and stared at the battlefield. The Germans had retreated. The crossroads remained in American hands. Reinforcements arrived an hour later and found Blake still sitting there, smoking quietly, boots dangling over the turret, Emma humming gently beneath him. A lieutenant approached. Sergeant Blake, sir, they're saying your tank killed 28 Germans. Blake shrugged. Emma did. Not me. With respect, the lieutenant said, that's not how the infantry sees it. Blake didn't reply, but he looked out over the valley, the broken walls, the burnt earth, the silent fields, and felt a heavy ache settle in his chest. Victory never felt like triumph. It felt like survival, and survival always came at a cost. The next morning, the battalion commander visited him personally. You understand, the major said, standing beside the tank, we're putting your tank in the official report. That was extraordinary work. Blake folded his arms. Just did what needed doing. That's not what the infantry thinks. The major paused. They're saying your tank fights like a sniper rifle. Blake chuckled softly. Not sure that's a compliment. Oh, it is. They're alive because of you. Blake looked at Emma. Rain was falling again, pattering softly against the armor. It felt like the tank was exhaling. She's tired, Blake murmured. You're tired too, maybe. You want me to reassign you to maintenance again. Blake surprised himself when he said, no. Let me stay with her. The major nodded once. As you wish, but I'm adding a note to the battalion records. Sergeant Blake and his modified Sherman prevented the loss of the valley through precision fire, eliminating 28 enemy combatants in 48 hours. Good work. Blake didn't celebrate. He placed his hand on Emma's armor, feeling the cold steel beneath his palm, and whispered. You did good, girl. In the weeks that followed, Emma became something of a legend. Tankers from other units came to see the 40-ton sniper. Infantrymen joked that if the Germans ever tried sneaking up at night, Emma would probably shoot them through the dark by smell alone. Someone painted a small stenciled crosshair on the side of the turret, but Blake wiped it off. Emma didn't need marks to prove herself. She wasn't perfect. She broke down often. She overheated. Her patched armor rattled. Her suspension squeaked like an old rocking chair. But she never once failed Blake in combat. And Blake, for the first time since St. Lo, felt something close to peace inside a tank again. The story didn't end with the valley. Blake and Emma fought through the Siegfried Line, across the Ruhr, and into Germany itself. They earned more kills, saved more lives. But the 28 kills in 48 hours became the story the men told around campfires, the story that turned a battered, resurrected Sherman into a battlefield myth. Long after the war, when Blake returned to Iowa and opened a small garage, people asked him about it. Was it true, they'd say, that you turned a dead tank into a sniper and held a whole valley by yourselves? Blake would wipe his hands on a rag, lean back, and smile faintly. Emma did the work, he always said. And sometimes, late at night, when the garage was quiet and the wind rustled the old metal signs on the walls, Blake would close his eyes and hear the engine rumble again, smell the oil, feel the turret shudder with each shot. He'd remember the rain, the valley, the fog, the Panther exploding, Dalton's steady breathing, Ortiz's bruised hands, Knox cursing cheerfully as he handled the gears. He'd remember the way Emma felt alive. And he'd whisper into the silence, "Good girl." Because some machines were more than steel. Some soldiers were more than men. And some stories, like the tale of the dead Sherman that became a 40-ton sniper, were simply too extraordinary to fade.